I think the easiest part of the car for me to upgrade is the front suspension. The Mustang II front suspension is extraordinarily popular. People have, in the early days, would go to the junkyard and cut the front end out of a Mustang II and put it in just about anything. They're really great swaps for early Ford coupes, Model A's, or 34 Deuce coupes, that sort of thing, even T-buckets. The width of the subframe is close enough to the original factory frames that you can weld them in pretty easily and switch from a really antiquated, almost horse-drawn carriage suspension to an independent front end with rack and pinion steering. And so it was an extremely popular thing to do. It got so popular that nowadays there are literally dozens and dozens of companies that make complete brand new Mustang II style front ends, purpose-built for installing in early Ford and Chevy and Chrysler vehicles. Just about any early vehicle you can think of, somebody out there probably makes a Mustang II front-end kit for it. It's not that it's the best handling front end in the world, it's just that it was readily available and about the right size for a pretty easy swap. And that's how it gained in popularity. Of course, as it gained in popularity, the aftermarket came in and started flooding the market with tons and tons of upgrades. So for instance, the Mustang II front end had stamped steel upper and lower control arms, and those are easily replaced with tubular steel components. The factory setup uses a strut rod. So the sway bar attaches to this link here, the strut rod attaches to the lower control arm, and then the strut rod attaches to the subframe at the rear end. Of course, you can upgrade the bushings to give you more performance here. There is an option that allows you to remove the strut rod completely. You can weld in a lower bracket, and then you end up with a traditional lower control arm that looks kind of like this upper. But I don't see any reason to do that. There's really no performance advantage to it. I could see if you were swapping this into a car other than a Mustang II, and you didn't have a place to put the strut rod, and you were just going to have to do more fabricating in order to build a rear mount for the strut rod, then yeah, definitely I would look at not using it at all and just using a more traditional looking lower control arm. But in my case, it's a direct bolt-in. So all I have to do is remove the lower control arm, bolt this one directly in its place, and same, that's actually the factory strut rod, but I've got a polyurethane bushing for the rear, and this is an upgraded mount for the sway bar at the front end with new hardware, of course. And then, of course, here are our tubular upper control arms. And of course they have upgraded ball joints in all four locations. These are the kind that sort of screw in. I use that term loosely because the ball joint has what appear to be threads on it, and the control arm does as well. But in talking to the manufacturer, really that's just a stamping process that they use. It's not like they use a tap and die to create those threads. So when you screw the things in, you notice there's a lot of resistance to it. It almost feels like you're cross-threading at some point. But it's just because they're not really threads, they're more knurls than anything, and you're just sort of forcing it through. But these are extremely durable ball joints that are installed. And so just the control arms alone and the new bushings on the strut rod are a tremendous upgrade over stock. I took it a little further. This sway bar is about 1/4 inch thicker than the stock sway bar, and so it's going to give a lot more, it's going to do a lot more to prevent body roll. The stock suspension is really bad about body roll. And so this sway bar is going to make a big difference. And then the shock would you would typically have a coil spring perch here, and then the subframe of the car has a pocket that the coil spring sits in, so the coil spring would be sandwiched between the subframe and the lower control arm with a shock going through the middle. But I don't have any of that because I've decided to replace it with coilovers. So I got a set of QA1 coilovers. Of course, the body is threaded so that you can adjust the preload on the springs. You can adjust the ride height and the preload. And then, of course, QA1 shocks are also, the dampening portion is also adjustable. So I can adjust the ride height, I can adjust the preload on the springs, and I can adjust the hydraulic damping within the coilovers. So all of this is going to make a huge difference, especially when I stiffen up the rest of the car with the subframe connectors and the traction bars and the rear sway bar, all that other good stuff together. And I've got one more thing over here. The Mustang II did have a pretty good rack and pinion setup, but it was kind of a first generation thing. Before the 70s, rack and pinion wasn't really used much by Ford. They started using it in the early 70s, and the Mustang II carried on that tradition. And the rack and pinion was pretty good, but nowadays they're hard to find, and they're expensive. So if you have a factory Mustang II power steering rack that is leaking and needs to be rebuilt, or has a lot of play in it, you're going to be in for hundreds, and I'm talking $400 or $500 in order to get that thing overhauled. This is a cheaper option, but it's also it also gains you a performance advantage. This is the rack and pinion out of a mid-80s to early 90s Thunderbird. So I think it's like 85 to 93 or something like that. Not the 94 to 98 Thunderbird Mark 8, but the generation before that, so mid-80s to early 90s. This rack and pinion actually has a tighter ratio. So lock to lock from full left to full right is almost one full turn less than the Mustang II. And so you get a lot more performance with a lot less movement out of the steering wheel. And so you're going to gain a lot of steering performance. The only disadvantage, or I won't say disadvantage, it's a challenge you have to work around, is that, let me banging stuff up here. The mounting bolts here are closer together on the Thunderbird by 1 inch. In other words, these two bolts on the Mustang are 1 inch further apart on the Mustang than they are in the Thunderbird. And so you have to find a way to mount these lugs, which are 1 inch closer together on center, onto the Mustang using bolts that are 1 inch further apart than the lugs. And the way you do that is with an offset bushing. So this bushing is offset from center line 1/2 inch. And so it moves this bolt out 1/2 inch, and it moves this bolt out 1/2 inch. And so the lugs remain 1 inch closer together, but the bolts end up in the correct position to bolt this directly onto a Mustang II. Other than that, it's exactly the same. The output threads on the rack are the same, and it uses or I've installed Mustang II outer tie rod ends on it. And the overall width is the same. And so not only is this option less expensive, but it's more responsive by a substantial margin. And of course, it has standard on this. I ordered this one with -6, sorry, I tightened them with a wrench, but -6 AN fittings so that I could plumb it into my Hydro Boost power steering / brake system. The only trouble I had with it, and let me turn it around here because I'm comfortable where I'm sitting and I don't want to move. The only problem I had were these two lines. When I ordered it, it came loose in a cardboard box. At some point in shipping, it had poked a hole in the cardboard box, and both of these lines were crushed. And so I called the company, and they said, "Oh crap! Yeah, we've been hearing that a lot. Our supplier is not." They drop ship it from the supplier, and the supplier's not packaging them sufficiently. We'll send them a note and we'll tell them to package it properly and send you another one. So I sent them back the damaged one, and the one I received was exactly the same. The lines were crushed. And so I called them and I was like, "Hey, listen, if you just want to send me the two lines, I'll keep the rack and I'll just replace the lines." And I mean, honestly, it's nothing to fabricate a set of lines. That wasn't the point. I paid for the thing and I received it damaged. So they're like, no, we can't replace the lines because the manufacturer has such a big problem with this because they're not preparing them properly and they're all getting sent back to them smashed, that they don't have any spare lines. So you got to send that rack back to us and we'll send you another one. So third time's the charm, so they say. Not in my case. The third one came in also. This one was the worst of all. And honestly, I don't have proof of it, but I think they sent me back one of the ones that I sent them, and then I got further damage in the second shipping. I can't prove that, but the box looked awful familiar when I'm the one that packaged it up to send to them, and what I got back looked awful familiar to me. So third time was not the charm. Sent it back to them. This time they gave me a discount and sent me a fourth one. This, in fact, is the fourth one. And so I hope like heck when I put this in the car that nothing is wrong with it. I hope it works as it's supposed to after what I went through to get it. Like I said, these lines are easy to build. And even this one, they didn't do a fantastic job with the lines. This one's too close to this fitting here. It's going to rub, so I'm going to, open up this bend a little to create more space here. And then I'll have to be careful that when I move this out this way that I don't cause a rub here. It's easily fixable, but at least now I have one that didn't come to me damaged. And so overall, this, like the rear end parts, the subframe connectors, the traction bars, the rear sway bar, rear shocks, all that sort of stuff. This is all direct bolt-on stuff. Anybody can do this. There's nothing at all complicated to it in any way. But when you put together a collection of parts that all work together well, like these will, it really makes a massive difference overall in how the car will perform. And so when I get to a point to where I'm finally able to start putting this stuff on the car, of course I'll make some videos at that time.